Hi everyone, welcome to the Movie Club, and if you're wondering why we're particularly Bat-themed today, it's because we reviewed this week The Batman. Are you excited, JT?
I am very excited. Matt Reeves, The Batman, bringing Robert Pattinson into the title role. I am so excited about this movie that I went back in time and got a Batman tattoo about 10 years ago. So, what would Batman do? Batman would watch this movie, but he would watch it with a critical eye.
You really could be doing more for this city. Your family has a history of philanthropy, but as far as I can tell, you're not doing anything.
Rahana, what did you think of The Batman?
This is a great movie. I mean, sure, it's got its flaws, but it's dark, it's gritty. It's got Batman basically just talking to himself for the first 15 minutes, which is essentially every comic that he's been in. And I just had a really, really good time. JT?
Look, I think my feelings around it are a little more complex than yours. But let's take a step back and have a look at the cast, because the cast is exceptional. That's one thing I could say. There was no bad performances in this. And that is a surprise when I had my doubts about Pattinson. Batman, I wasn't sold, but he owned the role. However, the people who surround him, Zoe Kravitz as Catwoman.
I can take care of myself.
The thing that I really appreciated about this movie is we tend to, whenever a new Batman comes out, to get really caught up by the person playing him. I mean, we've got Bat Keaton, we've got Bat Kilmer, and this time we've got Bat Pattinson, who for the first time doesn't overwhelm the character of Batman. Like, sure, he's in the suit, but you never feel the original pretty boy Pattinson coming through, which I appreciated.
No, there is nothing pretty about this role. This is, I guess the best way to describe it would be grunge Batman. And the soundtrack, which is another really high point for me. I mean, it's mostly score, but the film is bookended by Nirvana's Something in the Way, obviously a grunge era classic.
Fear is a tool. But when that light hits the sky, it's not just a call. It's a warning.
I love that part because, I mean, a lot of the times we do focus on the millionaire / playboy of Batman, and that really isn't who Batman is. I think there's this great comic book panel where Wonder Woman is holding her lasso of truth, and she asks everyone to admit who they are, and she's like, I'm Diana, and Superman's like, I'm Clark, and Batman's like, I'm Batman. Like, that's who he really is, and this movie does that for me. I mean, normally most Batman movies are an analysis of the Batman character, but I think this is one of the few that tells a ridiculously good story. It's a crime noir thriller, which is what Batman is.
This is an incredibly dark tale. It's reminiscent of films like Chinatown and even Seven. The main bad guy in this, Paul Dano's Riddler, is essentially a serial killer. And it's the race of Batman to stop him, a race which he does pretty poorly at. I've got to say, as a long-time Batman aficionado, Batman does not do a good job at stopping anyone getting killed in this film. But look, hitting on a couple of other really strong points before we move to the negatives, which I do feel there are a number. The cinematography by Australian Greg Fraser, who also did the cinematography for Dune recently, was top-notch. There are some images in this film that are not just comic book panels brought to life, but really turned into so much more through the medium of cinema. And,
Absolutely.
Both Fraser and Matt Reeves really must be commended for pulling out some unique images. And that's tough after so many years of Batman on screen. So credit to them for that.
Absolutely. And, it's really easy for something like this to either take itself too seriously to the point where it's ridiculous. But I think this movie has just enough grunge and style that it pushes past that, in my opinion, anyway. There were a couple of times when the monologuing is a little bit cheesy, but at the same time, you got to realize that Batman is built on monologuing. And while standing there in a batsuit saying, I am vengeance, is really hard to deliver. This movie manages it.
We'll get to the vengeance thing in a second, trust me. Look, the last thing I want to say in terms of positives is the action in this film is fantastic when it happens. This movie is 2 hours and 55 minutes long, and I would say, being generous, there's maybe 25, 30 minutes of action, and you feel those gaps. Because this movie is way too long. This could have stood with such an edit.
I agree, and that's probably one of my main criticisms, is this movie is somehow just a little bit indulgent sometimes when it comes to some of the scenes. Like, there's an iconic scene where two motorbikes drive away from each other, and that would have been enough, but we had to have these long meandering scenes beforehand. And look, I love the cinematography. This wasn't a Dune for me. I enjoyed looking at dunes, whereas looking at a lot of the scenes in Batman, I just wanted to get to the next grungy fight scene.
Yeah, there is some things about the Batman in this that really didn't gel with me as a lifetime Batman fan. And one of those was he has meetings. Particularly that first half of the meeting. Batman goes to meetings. Batman meets with Commissioner Gordon in the police station full of cops, in the daytime no less. Batman meets with Oswald Cobblepot in his club. Batman goes to meetings. Is that really a premise that we want to see in 2022?
I sort of enjoy that. It sort of removed the mystery of Batman being this omnipresent, super intelligent, super billionaire with spies all over the place. It sort of humanizes him a lot more and makes him seem a little bit more credible, I think, especially in the setting.
If that makes Batman seem credible, I'm going to suggest the fact that he is resistant to machine gun fire makes him incredible.
I'm vengeance.
In more than one occasion, he walks headlong into machine gun fire. And one of those, the second one, in a corridor that is made up of concrete and steel, two of the most sort of reflective materials in terms of firearms. And his head is protected by a thin layer of, we're going to say leather?
Leather or rubber. I mean, if that's really where your suspension of disbelief is destroyed, JT.
See, he wasn't smart enough to get his face out of the way when an explosion went off, and yet his beautiful, beautiful face didn't have a single mark on it apart from the aforementioned black makeup. It was just a little much in the, I'm Batman, I'm bulletproof
I
type
do
thing.
agree that there are a lot of things that happened in this movie that were ridiculous and only done because they were dramatic. There's a particular scene where Batman is trapped in a police station surrounded by police officers, and I am baffled that they carried him all the way there and didn't try and immediately tear off the mask until the last minute.
Till he wakes up, of course.
Till he wakes up, of
himself.
course, because that's when you try to take a mask off a Batman, is when he's waking up. And again, I feel like so much of logic has been sacrificed for style in this movie, and I'm cool with that sacrifice. I think it's worth the trade-off.
Yes, I would agree that this movie has trade-offs. Unfortunately, the one thing that leads this movie to be less than an unqualified success to me is the villain, because a superhero, as I've said time and time again, is only as good as the bad guy. And for me, Paul Dano's Riddler is not great. He's irritating rather than menacing. His grand plot, when it is all unveiled, doesn't really seem to have the depth of planning that sort of a super genius, as he's portrayed, really should have. It's quite a pedestrian plot at the end of the day.
I agree. I think quite a few of the characters aren't as clever as they want us to think they are. I mean, Robert Pattinson definitely isn't the smartest Batman out there. You're right, he's been hit in the head quite a few times, and then Robert just wasn't doing it. The Riddler as well, a lot of the riddles, I think I was sitting there solving them.
Yeah, look, this is definitely a Batman learning. There's a point where he's actually afraid of heights, which I just thought was an interesting take on the character. At least they didn't have him wet himself like Kevin Smith did in one of the graphic novels.
You just reminded me of a great scene, though, at some point where he flies, and instead of looking like a menacing bat, he looks like an adorable sugar glider, and I just had a really hard time taking that part seriously. They've stuck a GoPro to him for some reason as well, so the framing on that was completely off, especially when you consider the rest of the movie. But he does land rather satisfyingly underneath a bridge, which I appreciate for all the effort. Again, I do agree there are a lot of flaws in this movie, but given the way the trailer had presented itself, and given that we haven't really seen an iteration of Batman that takes itself this seriously, even in the Christopher Nolan ones, there were a couple of hint, hint, wink, winks, this is clearly a mentally ill man in a bat costume fighting crime. This movie takes itself super seriously, and it's so hard to do that well.
It is, and I would say Matt Reeves shoots probably above average in terms of doing it well. I'd give it, I don't give ratings out of 10, but I'd give it 3 bananas out of 17. But look, this is a movie that has its problem. Chiefly, its running time.
Oh, yeah,
But
I agree.
if you have patience, if you have the openness to an incredibly dark take on a classic character, then you will probably find something to like in the Batman.
Oh, absolutely. I can't wait for that edited down version by some fan on Reddit.
Worth watching on the big screen as well, because there are some great set pieces, and as we mentioned, some of the most amazing cinematography and beautiful art in a Batman film I think I've ever seen.
Absolutely. Oh, right. So what do you reckon, JT? Go out and see it?
Go out and see it, but be prepared to be not fully blown away, particularly if you're a hardcore fan like me.
Yeah, take a lot of popcorn, guys. It's going to be a long trip.
All right, this has been the Movie Club. Good to see you. We'll see you soon.
Bye.